Okay. So Learning Heroes, for those of you who are not aware of who Learning Heroes are, they're an organization that is really focused on how to support parents and how to support parents in supporting their children in schools. And they will do a better job clarifying all of this. But the long and short of it is that they've done a lot of work with a number of organizations, both working with states and educational organizations and nonprofits. And they have a lot of very legitimate, really amazing research that they've collected over the years, millions of dollars worth of research, as you can see, that they are going to be able to share with us today. And they're really experts on what is it like to work with parents? What makes most sense? How do we support parents effectively to support their children and be included in the school? The three folks we have with us today, we have Cornelia, who's here. She's a director of partnerships at Learning Heroes. She's got 15 years of nonprofit and school experience, working for places like Higher Achievement in the Baltimore City public school system. And she's very passionate about education and social change. Cindi Williams, she's a principal for HCM Strategists, which is a policy and analyst organization. I think she can share more about that. And she's also a co-founder of Learning Heroes and a principal there. She's got a ton of experience in communication, working for Gates and being an advisor to Secretary of Education in past administrations, among many other roles in government as well. And then Erica Gray, who's the director of research. She's a senior advisor to the team, leads the public opinion research, which we're going to be hearing about here, and content creation for the HCM strategist portfolio. And she has a background as a special education teacher for a long time, I believe a decade, Erica, if I'm correct. I was a special education teacher too, by the way. And she works on communication, education, data, broadly speaking. And I will allow them to elaborate on any of those introductions, but we're really excited to have them. So I'm going to pass the baton off. I believe Erica is going to be sharing the presentation for today, and we'll get right into it.
Yes, thank you so much. So I will share my screen now. All right. Okay, can everyone see my screen okay? Perfect. So as Nate mentioned, I'm Erica Gray. I'm a senior advisor for Learning Heroes, and the presentation that we're going to share today is I would say 3 separate parts. So I'm going to turn it over to start with my colleague, Cindi Williams, who will give some background on Learning Heroes, and then I'll run through some of the recent research that we've done.
So Nate, hi. So let me just back up and say we're pretty humbled that all of you jumped on today. We're knee deep right now in working with a number of states around their communication strategies to parents and reopening, and have some visibility into the 24/7 sort of stress that all of you are under. And so this time is for you. And I would just ask that, please interrupt us, ask questions, use the chat box. I mean, the whole purpose of this time is to give you information that you can use that hopefully makes your life easier, not harder. And Cornelia's got just a wealth of tools and things that hopefully you could cut and paste or in some way adapt. And so Learning Heroes has worked with at least half the states in the US. We mostly have worked at the state level, predominantly around using parent research to reimagine school reports and reimagine school accountability reports and sort of everything that a state already has to do for a parent, because parents have not typically been the sort of the audience for states to communicate with. It's not been their core competency. We've really tried to get in there with them and say, let's make everything that you're already showing parents more strategic and more decipherable. And then what are the other things that we could do? And so, we started out really with score report and school report cards. And then over this past 6 months have just gone knee deep into COVID and remote and the partnership that needs to happen between parents and teachers. So we're a nonprofit. We are funded by extraordinary funders across the US who believe that parents need to be a part of the equation. And if you don't use our stuff, then the work that we do doesn't matter very much. So we're delighted to be here with you. And I think there might be one more slide in this opening. So you can just see we've done 13 national surveys. We do a parent report every year. We're happy to share those. Parent 2020 happened during COVID, so you're getting ready to hear a lot about that. We've done 200 qualitative sessions. We focus all of our work on low-income parents because as a nonprofit, we are much more committed to trying to figure out how we help the historically underserved. We do our focus groups in Spanish. We also make sure that our Black focus groups are led by a Black moderator in order to really be able to create an environment for candor and for a lot of honest learning. So we're coming today sort of sitting on top of all of that and hoping that some of that is useful in this time.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the findings from our national poll. This is something that Cindi mentioned we do every year. This year we had the fortune to be able to actually conduct it sort of as COVID was really just starting. And I will also mention that this sort of sets this up for the more recent research that we've done. If you look at the methodology for this, you can see it was fielded back in May. So, and as we know, things change hourly in today's world. So we started with this survey and then we moved to qualitative research, which we've been doing more recently, which Cindi will speak to. But just a couple of highlights from this slide. So you can see it's a pretty big sample size. We talked to over 3,600 parents across all grade levels. We did oversamples with Hispanic, African-American parents, and those that were sort of in what were considered at the time the hotspots, as well as what we consider transition years. So as students are moving from elementary to middle school, middle to high, and then graduating from high school. And you'll notice on the right, there's a couple of sort of color-coded arrows. You'll see those throughout the next couple of slides. And that's really just to indicate where there was a statistically significant difference, either among subgroups or from our Parents 2019 poll, which we conducted last spring. So just the overall insights, which I'll dig more deeply into in a minute, we really learned that parents want and deserve an accurate picture. And that's really been the North Star of Learning Heroes since the beginning. We found that crazy high numbers of parents, somewhere around 90%, believe that their kids are at or above grade level. And we all know on this call, that is just unfortunately not the case. It's a lot closer to a third. We also learned from this year's poll that parents are really activated. They're going to show up differently in the fall, which really leads to the opportunity to redefine the relationship between teachers, schools, and parents. So this is something that, at least for myself, when we learned this, I was especially surprised, especially thinking, and even in the media today, we always hear sort of these horror stories of parents who are just completely overwhelmed by helping their kids facilitate remote learning. But we actually found that it's a little bit different, and not all the news stories are 100% accurate. So you can see here, hopeful and grateful was the first emotion that came to mind for parents. And we do see the anxious and worried, but it was the third highest. So parents really are proud of the work that they did in the spring. They think they did a great job. And a lot of them, we had an open-ended question on the survey, and they said they really actually enjoyed the time that they spent with their child and just getting to work with them in a deeper way. Not surprisingly, we saw that parents were more engaged. On average, they said they spent about 2.5 hours a day on their child's schoolwork. But what's interesting about this is the 2/3 said they were more connected with their child's education than ever before. And we know 70% said that they wanted to know what the material was that their child needed to make up at the end of the school year. And then you can see there are some statistically significant differences on here too, among African-American and Hispanic parents. Those numbers are a little bit higher. So we know that parents were more engaged. They were also more confident. So these are two questions that Learning Heroes has asked probably for the past 3 or 4 years to track longitudinally. So you can see on the left, it increased. Parents thought that college was more important this year than last year. And then you can see at the bottom that was true of all subgroups, with the exception of Hispanics, where that number stayed the same. They also said that they would be more confident that their kid would be prepared for college upon high school graduation. And then you can see that also was a statistically significant increase from 2019. But there's also some pretty remarkable differences among the subgroups as well. So they're more engaged, they're more confident. So we all hypothesized that that 90% number that I mentioned earlier would go down. But actually what happened, and I think I can speak for all of the Learning Heroes team when I say we were pretty surprised by this, they actually have a less accurate picture. So you can see 92% of parents think their child is at or above grade level in math and 93% in reading. So it was pretty surprising to us. They spent more time on their child's schoolwork, they're more engaged, but they're actually less informed and have a more inflated picture. Then you can see hardly over a third of parents thought that their child would actually need some sort of academic catch-up at the beginning of this school year as a result of the non-traditional ending of the school year last year. So one of the things that we learned, this was a sort of a combination of the poll that we did along with some of the later qualitative research. And it sounds like it's common sense, but I think there really aren't enough words to describe just how big of a concern safety is to parents. It's really almost impossible to get them to really focus on academics because safety really is primary. You can see here, you know, one parent said they wouldn't send their child back to school until there's actually a vaccine. And then the verbatim at the bottom, when really probing on academics, the parent said, I feel like they're grasping it and they'll jump back in just fine. So it's really, you know, safety is their top concern, followed by social and emotional learning, which is a very, very, very distant second. So all of this really just combines to really show that there's an opportunity this year. We know that parents are going to show up differently. And if you look at this slide, you know, we asked parents how likely they would be to do all of these different things. And you can see at the top, it's actually great news. Large percentages of parents, by far majorities, said they wanted to get a better understanding of what their child is expected to learn. They want to find more time to talk to their children, to engage with the teachers, to get a better understanding of where their child is performing. And then you can also see that for African American and Hispanic parents, those percentages were even higher. So this is where, as Learning Heroes, and you'll see a little bit more when Cornelia walks through some of the tools that we've created, but our goal for this year is to really capitalize on this opportunity and to help strengthen the relationships between parents and their schools. So I'm going to turn it over to Cindi to talk a little bit more about the qualitative research. But before we do that, are there any really pressing questions? I don't want to just kind of talk at you guys, so I just want to give you the opportunity, I guess, to just interrupt. All right, I'll take that as a no. So Cindi, do you want to take it from here?
Sure. So we have been in the field for the last 6 weeks with the PTA, with state of New Jersey, with NWA, which many of you probably deliver the map, and others. And so this part of the presentation is a little bit messy because it's qualitative work. And so we're not going to show numbers, but really just want to give you a sense of what we're hearing, like literally last night. The good news is what we're hearing is potentially different by people group, but not by state. And so I feel pretty confident in what we're going to share. So the safety thing, if you don't start with safety, which I know you already are, safety is 1, 2, 3, 4. Social emotional learning is, 5 or 6. And in an hour and a half of focus groups, if you don't bring up academics, it doesn't come up unprompted. And so that is the biggest point here, is that I know as education leaders, We want to talk about learning loss, and NWAs and others in their conversations with decision makers, have certainly led with learning loss. But for a parent, what has become clear to us is kids aren't behind because they're all in the same place. So if we all ended on March 13th and we're all starting again in a remote situation on September 5th, then all of the kids are in the same boat, therefore nobody can be behind. And so they're only benchmarking themselves against the other kids in their class. An international comparison or some sort of college readiness measure is not relevant to them. And actually, we've heard parents say things like, those parents who kept pushing their kids along, those kids are just going to be bored and have to wait while the other kids catch up. So this idea that kids are behind is just a non sequitur for parents. So on top of it not being the thing they're most concerned about, they also don't believe it. And so in trying to meet parents where they are, we've been really viewing this as a three-legged stool, which is you start with safety, you move to social emotional, and then it's not that you can't talk about academics, but if you lead with it, I think they'll tune us out. It's not their rationale for returning to school. And so if the goal is to get students more comfortable with hybrid and in-person instruction, not the place to go. It is all about trust. And so what we have seen more recently is if you didn't trust your school to deliver on the big and little things before COVID, then that barrier is even higher now. So you heard things like, my school didn't even have school in the soap dispensers in the bathroom before COVID happened. How in the world would I expect them now to be able to sanitize the building? So we almost to a person have heard African Americans show a lot less trust for their schools. And all of this is happening in the middle of a movement around racial justice that is not insignificant in the context of bringing kids back during COVID. And so it's all happening at the same time. And so the African American groups that we have been doing have been all African American with an African American moderator. And I will just say, we have been so humbled by what we've heard. You hear things like, they're just not going to take care of my kids. So I know everybody on this call has this first and foremost in their mind and is working 24 hours a day to do just that. But I just think the over communicating of that is going to be really important. This trust piece comes up in every single group. Parents are bought in on masks in the states that we've been working in. I will say, we've not been in every state, and I know masks are politically charged right now. So I guess I don't want to be bold enough to say we know how masks are being seen in every state, but first and foremost, parents writ large have said they are comfortable with it. Where they get squishy and what comes up unprompted are bathrooms and buses and lunchtime. So if they think you can fully execute on safety procedures in a classroom, if that's a barrier they're able to overcome, where it falls apart or these other places. And so I think as you start to communicate these really detailed, comprehensive plans about reopening, just be prepared for those questions to come up from parents unprompted. So I'd love to stop there for a minute and just ask if this is resonating with you, if you have questions, if you have pushback. I'm kind of blowing through this fast in the hopes that we'll have time for questions and answers and be more interactive, but anything that you want to say here since you're on the front lines and doing the work? I get a 1, yes, resonating. Thank you, Monterey. Anybody else where this sounds true? Nate, is everybody usually this quiet?
Sometimes. Usually John Rice is here to be able to instigate now. We have some thumbs up as well coming through, which is great. Feel free to use the reaction button on Zoom if you'd like to for the folks who are listening. I see another one from
I see Damien.
Pat Nona, yeah.
Yeah, and I live in the Seattle Bellevue area, so go Renton. I love what you're doing. We have tested a lot of message frames, and one of them was around what is essential, because that's a new word in our COVID lexicon. And so when you talk about schools as being essential or a part of the recovery, parents push back pretty quick and say teachers are essential, but buildings are not. And so I just think that's an important thing to keep in our head. Parents are so ready for teachers to be in charge. We pressure tested a lot of words around how parents view their role. And so one of the words we went into our research with was facilitators of learning. And we actually thought that was sort of the level set we heard in the national quantitative data. And it was a bridge too far. So the word facilitator, really what we got back is that bar's too high. We can't go facilitate. Like, we want to support. We will be allies, but we don't want to be in charge. We really need the teacher to be in charge. And where it really breaks down is I don't want to have to understand the curriculum. I don't want to have to understand the content. I want to make sure that my child is logged on and attending and doing what they're supposed to do. And then back to the national data that Erica was sharing, they're really looking for clear expectations. So if Erica had showed you that entire deck, which we can send to Nate and pass around, you'll see that most parents felt like they didn't have any interaction with their teacher in the spring. And if they did, it was very generalized. It was to the classroom. What they're really looking for is individualized communication with the teacher. And Cornelia is going to talk to you about how we think you can do that in a systemic way. But if they could have anything right now, it is a plan to talk to a teacher about their kid. The second thing they want is as much detail, like more is more is more is more. They don't just want 3 bullet points on your processes and your plans around safety. If you're going back in person, they want to know that you've thought through all of it. And so we've seen some real debacles across the country where leaders have gotten on too quickly, and parent town halls been able to answer a third of the questions, and then the takeaway from the parents is they haven't thought about it yet. Like, it pushed the trust further away as opposed to bringing the trust closer to. So swamping them with details is an awesome way right now to have them feel more secure and confident that you've thought through everything. But talking to them before you have details is a way to lose their trust. And then, we are hearing a lot of parents tell us that this is a life or death decision that they're making. And so we're not going to persuade those parents to come to an in-person or a hybrid school setting. And what they really want is for us to honor their decision. They are making that decision based on their own personal experience with COVID. They've potentially lost a family member. They know somebody who's no longer with them that they love. They have somebody in their house with asthma. For whatever reason they're making the decision, they're looking for school districts and leaders to honor the decision that they're making. So I think our society right now is filled with judgment and cynicism and polarization, and they're just looking for the school system to be different. So messaging, you just heard me say it, more is more is more. You cannot over communicate. They feel so under communicated with, and writ large. The great thing is you can't personalize this. I don't think we've been in any of your districts, but just in general, there's so much uncertainty and distrust, and even they feel chaos. And so they're hungry. So the demand side of the equation is there in a way that it's never been before. If you guys have a town hall or have hosted them, which I bet many of you have, I'm sure you're seeing that the numbers there are huge. So overconfident statements are not believable. So if you say you can keep a kid safe, they say no, you can't. So I think, leading with a mitigating statement, which is, we're not going to be able to keep every child 100% safe. We can't even do that in a non-COVID environment. But here's what we can do. I think, any way that you can not muddy the waters, but sort of lean into the ambiguity and the complexity, it will make you more believable. And I think that is counterintuitive for leaders. As leaders, you want to lead. You want to build confidence by saying, I got this. Like, I've 100% got this. You can rest assured. And in this particular environment, it just doesn't work. No one safety measure is the it, but all of them in combination, if they are explained as a comprehensive plan, visuals help start to make parents feel safer. So masks and social distancing and sanitizing and being able to isolate and being able to provide testing locations and being in combination. The more you talk about them, the more the blood pressure starts to go down. I think there's a second page on this one, Erica. There's not. So let me just say something that's not in this deck. And again, we're learning in real time. So parents don't trust their schools to keep them safe if they didn't trust their schools before COVID to serve their needs. But parents don't trust other parents. And so we need to think about that. So what they say is based on their own personal experience, which is, I know I've sent my child to school sick when I shouldn't have, but I didn't have any other choice because I didn't have a plan for them to be home and I had to go to work. So I don't trust parents not to send their kids to school sick because they're not going to have a choice. They're going to have to go to work. And so we have heard that come up literally almost in every group. So I think there's got to be a way to address that, which is so it is okay to tell parents, this is what you're responsible for. Here are the 10 things we need from you. And we're all in this together. And we're not all in this together in a sort of trite, sloganish way. We're all in this together because our safety is inextricably linked. And here is what we expect of you. We've been toying around with some sort of parent compact or something that parents initial, something that just says to the whole parent community that you've thought about this sort of loophole that parents don't trust each other. And it literally is coming up everywhere. We've been testing anecdotes that work, things that make you feel more confident. And so if you have an essential childcare facility in your community where there hasn't been any COVID and they've been taking care of essential workers' kids for the last 6 months, that's a great way to say that it's possible to keep kids safe, particularly younger kids. Right now, when you give people science, it is a little bit politicized. So it helps to have examples and science, and particularly examples that are right there in your community. I see in the chat box, what about parents that want to send their children so they have human interaction and student interaction? I mean, that is the number one reason parents are willing to mitigate risk and go back is the social and emotional, because they have seen a change in their students. So it's lack of routine, it's lack of structure, lack of social. So you hear parents talk about how their kids don't hear is that, you know, but when they go back, if they're 6 feet apart and they still have masks, is that social interaction meaningful enough to overcome the social and emotional challenges? So, you know, that will be seen when they get back and kids come back and say that that some school in this format is better than no school. So you can't really prove that on the front end. But you're right to say the human interaction, if you're trying to actually get kids back in school in a hybrid setting, that is going to be your selling point. Does that answer your question, David? Oh, okay. Cornelia, talk to us about tools.
Great. So the first one, this is actually one, I'm going to run through this one and I hyperlinked this. So you can see just a little, you can get a little bit of an idea of what is there. So some of you may have already seen this. This is a resource put out by the Donovan Group, and it's a toolkit for school reopenings. And it's pretty comprehensive. Let me make this bigger. So you can see they have this roadmap, and it actually goes month by month. So if you look at it, it breaks it down 3 weeks before the first day of school, and then it goes through to 2 weeks. But they give some really tactical and common sense things that you all can do to better communicate with your stakeholders. And then if you click on each of these headings, they'll actually give you some templates that you can use. So I think combined with, especially, you know, the research that Cindi just walked through that we've been doing over the past 6 weeks, combined with these templates, it's a really powerful combination, especially when you're looking to reach parents. Okay, Cornelia, do you want me to turn it over to you?
You can drive the slide. I think it may be easier because you can double click. Yeah. So thanks, Erica and Cindi. And so it's great to be on this call, but what I'm so excited about is just being able to share some of the resources that Learning Heroes has mustered up as we're focusing on making stronger parent-teacher communications. And so what we're looking at here is going into the fall, our back to school campaign is called Ready to Partner. And so it's focused on supporting strong parent teacher partnerships from the beginning of the school year. And the parents are able to, the parents are able to use some of the resources where it's for parents and educators. And so with our focus on parents and teachers as partners, we've updated our parent teacher communication tool, and that's what you see here. And if you want to double click on it, yeah. And so what we're looking at here is it's really a three-step process that we designed to support existing efforts and models that are in schools. So like parent-teacher meetings. And so step one, teachers share beginning of the year benchmark data in a visual parent-friendly way. You can kind of see the outline. And so step two, this is where parents and students would share their reflections on student strengths and areas of support. An example of this may also be where a parent may say, I've noticed my child has started taking more interest in reading, chapter books since your last assignment. And then how does that relate to social emotional skills? And so that's a way to kind of provide some observations and share some feedback with teachers. And then what's really important and most important, the area that I love is, this is where together parents and teachers are able to create a plan on step three for supporting their child on a shared understanding of the needs. And so this includes letting parents know what key skill areas you should focus on, and then alignment with the resources as well. And yes, we do, Rachel. We have these in Spanish and English. And our next, and if you can continue to go, our next slide is, what's great about this is while we're putting out this resource as a tool, we also have a discussion guide, and this is really for teachers and educators. And so it's a how-to guide on how to use the parent-teacher planning tool. And so the discussion guide, it provides you with concrete talking points and supports for like answering frequently asked questions. And this is also from sometimes how you need to be able to support and respond to parents have some tough questions. And it may come from parents around grade level progress. And so the discussion guide, the way it's moderated, is be able to provide support for teachers, whether they're using the guide or not, but it also gives teachers guidance on the information to share with parents and how to best communicate with them. Next slide. So cool and interactive. I love this slide. And we can go on to our readiness check. Yep. And so our readiness check, again, this is more like a game. And so this is kind of like a gut check for parents to be able to use, where students can answer 3 to 5 questions, and it's a quick review over math and reading. This is also available in English and Spanish, but what's really cool about this is where it's digital. And so it's mobile, and you can also use it on your computer. And so parents have an opportunity to really see how their child is progressing on key skills that they may need for up to the next year. And so at the end, they're also connected with skills, more so like videos or resources that align and supports the child's learning at home. What we found very helpful for some feedback is sometimes maybe your child's in the 2nd or 3rd grade. You may want to start at kindergarten or 1st grade to kind of do a reassessment of some of the skills and see where they are, and then also support them into the next grade level. And so again, what's really helpful about this is available in English and Spanish, and you can also find these tools on our website. And I believe, Nate, you had put it in the chat. And I want to take a pause there if anyone has any additional questions about the resources that we have. Feel free to put it in the chat or.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add about the parent-teacher planning tool. So that was something that, in the 6 weeks of qualitative research that Cindi mentioned earlier, we tested that with parents. So we tested it and we refined it, and we made a couple of different tweaks, probably the largest being creating a version for elementary and middle school students, because what we heard loud and clear from middle school parents is that they really wanted their child to take on a bigger role, especially when it came to answering the social and emotional questions. But one of the areas of the tool where we probably spent the most time was just crafting that introductory language. And that's really where we took everything that we've learned and really trying to walk that fine line between helping parents understand that their child may have some unfinished learning from last year, but really trying to honor how they did step up in the spring and really feel proud about the role that they played with distance learning in the spring. So I would definitely say, you know, that tool is really grounded in a ton of research, which we all know from experience, just because we were the ones sort of going back and doing all the different iterations. So that's a great question. So do we have high school tools? So, you know, I can speak particularly to the parent-teacher planning tool. We did test that with high school parents, and they thought that it would be better suited for middle school students. I also know, you know, they quite frequently wonder, how would a high school teacher do this when kids have so many different teachers and each teacher has so many students? And Cornelia, is anything you would add on that?
I was typing and trying to listen at the same time. And so while we look at the readiness check, that's a great introduction to that, Erica. It's specifically focused on grades K through 8, but sometimes what we find is that 9th grade students, as a review, can be able to look at some of the concepts and actually take the test to support them going into the 9th grade as well.
Any other questions, either about the research or the resources?
Hi, thank you so much. Do you have research that is broken up by grade level? So like you have high school specific research, or is it just not significantly different enough that it's useful to share that way?
So for this round of research this past year, because we were trying to get it out so quickly, we do not have like a nice and pretty packaged report, but we have, I want to say it was 2019, right, Cindi? That's when we did, so it was last year, and the report is on our website, but we actually did two rounds of research, one that was focused specifically on high school, because to your point, there are some marked differences between K through 8 and high school parents. And I can share that link with Nate, so he can send that around as well.
But are there any specific questions? Because high school parents show up so differently than middle and elementary. I mean, they are so much less engaged. The student agency there becomes predominant. You know, it's like, my kids got this, my role is so diminished. There's much less knowledge about individual teachers or classwork, or it becomes a totally different animal. So, you know, as far as understanding that piece, happy to answer if there's a specific question. Elementary parents are by far the low-hanging fruit. I mean, they really, really want to know everything you'll tell them. Middle school, less so, and high school, they become almost detached. I think COVID is different, but just in general, that has been our experience. Mm-hmm.
A little bit of a different question, just going back to the research that you gathered through the focus groups in the survey. One thing that we have noticed in that Mastery Charter Schools is our families with students with exceptionalities and special needs have a lot of questions. And so your frame around like health and safety are 1 through 4, then social emotional, then academics, that does resonate with the exception of students with special needs. So I was just curious if there was anything in particular that came out in this. You have it broken down by demographic, but just in terms of special education in general, or English learners that was revealed in the data?
So for the qualitative research that we did, because it's a little bit different than the quantitative, we did have parents in the group who had students with IEPs. But because it's not a larger sample size, it's a little bit different what we can garner. So we don't necessarily have like data that we can break down in that way. And we did include parents of students with IEPs in our national poll as well. Off the top of my head, I don't recall there being any significant differences But I will also say that the line of questioning that we did back then, and even the fact that the school year was still going on, was a little bit different. So Cindi, do you, I don't,
I would just make a plug here that is research that needs to be done.
it does, it really does.
And it should be done with I happen to be a special needs parent. And it should be done with just special needs parents so that it's not a mixed group. And exactly. I would love to see somebody fund that, because I do think it's a completely different cohort. Mm-hmm. I think the social and emotional needs, the need for extra help in person and the ability to do all sorts of things are different. So I don't think anything we have said today necessarily could be applied to a special needs parent with fidelity.
Mm-mm. That's a great. Any other questions? Or Nate, do you want us to turn it back over to you? I believe you have some closing slides as well. And we can obviously keep it open for additional questions.
Yeah, I think we definitely can keep it open for additional questions. I have a single slide with a few reminders for the Strategy Lab cohort. So maybe what would make most sense is I'll just share that slide now and then just turn it back over, and we can leave this window open. If people would like to stay and ask questions, that'd be great.
Yeah,
does that work?
Good.
Great. And I'm going to start sharing my screen. Erica, if you could unshare. Thank you. Apologies for the delay here. So really quickly, for our Strategy Lab cohort folks, I know we have some additional folks who are from districts who are part of the Strategy Lab, but you don't necessarily need to pay attention to this, but you're welcome to see. First of all, huge thank you to the Learning Heroes team for coming to share all this. It's extremely helpful, I think, and I think it'll benefit our teams a lot. Also, a huge thank you to all of you working in schools right now, doing the hard work, making this seemingly impossible task of going back to school, whatever that looks like in your community right now. We know it's an extreme challenge, and we really appreciate you and appreciate your time here. As the calendar shows here, next week we're going to have, at the same exact time, our next expert session is going to be with WestEd, talking about comprehensive student development and students' social emotional needs being paramount and focused, foundational in your return to school. Our all cohort session is going to be happening a week from Monday, and that will be focused just around collaboration for those who need it right away. We're not going to do a whole thing together really in depth, but rather really get everyone collaborating on your problems right now that you're dealing with. And then we'll also have an expert session around curriculum and instruction that I can share specifics of early next week. So keep an eye out for that. And I'll stop there and turn it back over to the Learning Heroes team and open it up for questions or thoughts that others have.
I guess I would just ask if there are any tools or, sorry, any tools that you've created that you would say have been highly effective, or since we're talking to states across the country, is you guys were chosen for this cohort because you're doing things right? Is there anything you've created that you think is really working?
It's a humble group. I think there's more working than people think. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I thought you were muted there for a second. So I would actually like to know, so if you don't have anything that you've created or found effective that you're using now, are there other things, like we just walked you guys through a couple of the tools that Learning Heroes has created, the resource from the Donovan Group, but are there other things, I mean, you guys you're doing this on the ground all day, every day. This is you live this stuff. So are there other things that you can think of that would be helpful that you have not seen, either created or just that's been done well?
I'm curious, there was nothing shared about the challenges that families, students, and parents face with the online, I want to say like technology, whether it's internet, access, understanding, what percentage of these parents were Spanish speaking only? How did they navigate through these? I think that's what I was looking more about, like the challenges that a lot of people face and how do we address those and try to find different approaches to them for this coming school year.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we can send Nate the full deck to share out with the group because we did dig into that in both the survey and the qualitative research. Off the top of my head, I know we did an oversample of Hispanic parents. I don't know the exact percentage that were Spanish speakers, but we definitely did hear in the qualitative that there were a lot of struggles with the technology piece of remote learning. That being said, what parents are expecting in the fall, and this goes back to, I think Cindi talked a little bit about this, they want their role to be a little bit stepped back. They don't want to facilitate their learning, but they kind of gave teachers this period of grace in the spring because teachers were just trying to figure it out as every day came, which we were all doing. But what they're expecting for the fall is a very different experience. So they're expecting for the districts to have it together and to have devices to be able to provide or give parents some sort of resource to get online, because we did hear that. In one of the focus groups that we did, I guess it was probably mid-June, we specifically recruited a group of parents who were low income to really dig specifically into that technology and the digital divide issue. And we heard that loud and clear. And it wasn't just, the fact that they didn't have a device in their house. Even if they had a device, you had multiple children, sometimes the parents trying to use it. So it's an issue. I think the other barrier that we heard more frequently unaided was just digital literacy. A lot of times, there were portals and there were links and schedules that parents were being sent every single day, and they didn't really know, how to use Google Meet or Google Chat, or how to access, the online learning platform. So that is it's a big issue, and I think it's different for every district, but absolutely parents are looking to have a better experience in the fall.
I don't know if that answers your question. I mean, they are, where they don't have enough devices or they have 4 kids and 1 device, they are feeling very flat-footed and are not really sure what to do. So I don't, every district is trying to figure out how they get devices and hotspots and internet and buses and all this sort of stuff in a remote setting differently. So they are looking to school districts to help them figure it out. But the parents that we talked to didn't have a plan.
If no one else has questions, I'll ask one for the group. I'm curious from the Learning Heroes team, if you've seen schools that are doing an effective job of the non-scientific research for themselves in their communities, right? You're looking at research that's very wide and really thorough. And schools don't have the opportunity to do it the same way you do, but I'm wondering if you've seen schools that do a good job of understanding their community and working with them in such a way that they're getting this information for their local context in a way that's effective, that might be helpful for this group to think about moving forward.
Yes, I mean, I think probably everybody is doing the surveys. I think the survey response rates have been really high. I think those surveys can be done in a contextualized way where it's not just to, pick one of the 3, hybrid, remote, in person, but it's, tell us more about your struggle and your experience and things like that. So I don't really want to name districts, but we certainly have seen some districts take advantage of the fact that if you're going to be communicating with parents anyway, you can add some more things to it than you might normally not. And then we're seeing the parent town halls happen everywhere. We're seeing huge response rates on parent town halls. That's a double-edged sword if you're not ready, because parents have very specific questions. And so, curating those in a way that sets you up for success is really important. We're working with Global Meet right now because it's not a chat box, but it's a set of questions that are behind a firewall so that you are not caught off guard with things that are inappropriate. Like there are ways to manage conversations that are both interactive and transparent without setting yourself up to have a negative, have it backfire on you. So, but we are seeing the parent town hall being used well in a lot of places. And parent advisory groups are fantastic, except they tend not to be representative. And so what happens is you put a parent advisory group together of parents you already know and who are usually fairly active. And then you make a decision based on them when they're not then representative. And so the reason we go do the scientific research and do the blind recruit against a set of criteria is to make sure that these are not activist parents, but that these are the everyday parents that are harder to reach. That's the thing we're seeing not done well is in states where they put together parent advisory committees that are carefully curated, then they make decisions based on those. And so then they think everybody's talking about micro schools and everybody's talking about pods. And then you look at our research and nobody's talking about micro schools and nobody's talking about pods because we're working in low-income communities. But there are things we are seeing being done very well. And just the idea that parents now are a group that is being paid attention to in a much more meaningful way, I think will have benefits for the system at large. Erica and Cornelia, is there anything you would add to that? I know Cornelia is having some technical challenges here.
Yeah, I think you captured a lot. Cindi was just thinking about like focusing on like whether it's advisory groups or parent groups, just hearing more what's going on in the field and just having worked with previous organizations who are really looking at going into the school year with better insights on communications and how they can have more creative touch points with parents. So yeah.
Nate, did that capture your question?
Yeah, that's helpful. I think it's helpful even to be validated to say, yeah, survey is a good way to keep getting an idea of what's going on, right?
Yeah.
And certainly the focus groups, that really resonates, certainly with my experience personally. I think our districts will feel similarly, but yeah.
If I could also say one last thing about what not to do is I think traditionally we create inside our state systems FAQs for superintendents, and then we start pushing them down to parents. And so the original document was created for decision makers, and then we tweak it for parents. And then parents see a lot of things in those FAQ documents that are not decipherable for them. And because of all the cynicism going on right now in our country, they actually think they were designed to confuse them. When actually it's just that we got really busy and we created a document for decision makers, and then we put the word parent on top and we just changed a few sentences. And that's because we are just trying to get through our day. But I would just argue right now that when you're really trying to connect with parents, create a document for parents by design on the front end as the singular audience, as opposed to tweaking something that was created for decision makers, because they honestly think you're trying to confuse them, which nothing could be further from the truth. But it's a downstream consequence of our country right now not believing in public institutions. On that really happy note, I will say we are grateful from the bottom of our hearts for the work you do. I used to work at the U.S. Department of Ed, and we had our fair share of crises where we worked 24 hours a day and slept under our desk. And so I just, we really are so grateful for the work that you're doing. And if there's anything at all that we know that helps make your life easier that we didn't talk about today, please let Nate know and we'll try to help.
Thank you all so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you all.